David Reed's oxygen meter blinked yellow as he crawled deeper into the asteroid's cave system. 3 weeks stranded on this rock, and his supplies were running dangerously low. The mining colony above had been abandoned for years, stripped clean of anything useful. His only hope was finding something, anything in these unexplored tunnels that might help him signal for rescue. The cave walls glittered with ordinary minerals. David had spent 15 years studying rocks, and these held nothing special. Just standard carbonaceous material mixed with ice deposits. He was about to turn back when his helmet light caught something that made him freeze. The wall ahead wasn't rock anymore. It was crystal, but not any formation he'd ever seen. The structure was too perfect, too geometric. David approached slowly, running his gloved hand across the surface. The crystal was warm. That was impossible. This deep in the asteroid, everything should be frozen solid. Patterns swirled beneath the surface, moving like oil on water. David leaned closer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The crystal pulsed once, twice, then blazed with light so bright he had to shut his eyes. When he opened them again, he wasn't in the cave anymore. David stood in a chamber so massive he couldn't see the ceiling. Metallic walls curved away in impossible angles, covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The air was breathable. He ripped off his helmet and took a cautious breath. Real air, not recycled. How was that possible? A voice spoke, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was smooth, neutral, without any accent or emotion. Species identification in progress. Scanning complete. Classification, human. Origin world. Earth, Sol system. Status unregistered. David spun in a circle, trying to find the source. Who's there? Where am I? I am the Arbiter. You are within Testing Nexus 7, a facility constructed by the Galactic Accord for species evaluation. Your presence here is unexpected. Humans are not scheduled for assessment. A form materialized in front of him. It wasn't solid, just a shimmer in the air that roughly suggested a humanoid shape. David's heart hammered against his ribs. This was real. This was actually happening. After decades of humanity wondering if they were alone in the universe, here was the answer. I didn't mean to intrude, David said carefully. My ship was destroyed. I've been stranded on the asteroid above for 3 weeks. I was just looking for supplies. Your intentions are irrelevant, the Arbiter replied. You have activated a testing sequence. The Nexus has already logged your species data. A decision must now be made regarding humanity's status within the Accord. David felt his stomach drop. What kind of status? The shimmer moved as if the Arbiter was considering how much to explain. For 50,000 cycles, the Galactic Accord has maintained order among the stars. Species that demonstrate sufficient capability are granted access to protected trade routes, advanced technology sharing, and diplomatic recognition. Those that fail are classified as pre-sentient. Their worlds are quarantined for 500 cycles to allow for natural development. You're saying one test determines if humanity gets locked out of the galaxy for 500 years? David couldn't keep the panic from his voice. Correct. 847 species have been evaluated at facilities like this one. 203 have passed. The remainder failed to demonstrate the necessary qualities. David ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this. He was a geologist. He spent his days looking at rocks and writing reports. He wasn't a diplomat or a soldier or anyone important. And now the entire future of humanity rested on whatever this test involved. What if I refuse? He asked. Refusal is counted as failure. The result is the same. And if I take the test and fail, the result is the same. David laughed, a short, bitter sound. So my options are fail definitely or fail probably. Great odds. The test is designed to be fair, the Arbiter said. Its voice held no sympathy, just statement of fact. It adapts to each species' physiology and knowledge base. What is asked of you will be within human capability. Whether you can demonstrate those capabilities is the question. The chamber around them shifted, and suddenly David could see through the walls. Images played across the transparent surfaces. He watched an insect-like creature methodically building a shelter from available materials. The timestamp showed it took 6 days. Another image showed massive furry beings that looked like upright bears. They were establishing some kind of food cultivation system. 9 days for completion. These are previous candidates, the Arbiter explained. The Talari and the Bronthar. Both passed their evaluations. Most species require multiple days to complete the trial sequence. The test measures tool creation, resource management, problem-solving capability, and adaptability. Social cooperation is also evaluated for species that function in groups. David watched the aliens work with slow, careful precision. They were methodical, thinking through each step before acting. It reminded him of laboratory work, controlled and measured. What happens during the test? Do I get preparation time? You will be placed in a simulated hostile environment with limited resources. How you respond will determine your species' fate. The simulation is entirely realistic. Pain, exhaustion, hunger, all will be genuine experiences. Death is prevented, but suffering is not. That was comforting. David looked at the images again, watching the careful, cautious approaches. These species had time to think, to plan, but they also seemed to lack urgency. They moved like creatures that had never faced real danger, never had to make split-second decisions between survival and death. Maybe that would be humanity's advantage. Maybe Earth had prepared them in ways these other species hadn't needed, or maybe he was about to doom his entire species because he'd crawled into the wrong cave. "I'll take the test," David said quietly. There wasn't really a choice. Refusing meant failure. At least this way there was a chance, however slim. "Acknowledged," the Arbiter replied. "Physiological scan shows human classification as extreme category endurance predator. Origin world rated as Class 12 hostile environment. This is unusual. The test difficulty will be calibrated accordingly." David felt a chill run down his spine. Class 12 hostile environment. That didn't sound good. What does that mean exactly? It means your world is significantly more dangerous than the origin worlds of most sentient species encountered. Your test will reflect appropriate challenge level. Prepare yourself. The chamber dissolved around him. The last thing David saw was the Arbiter's shimmer, and for just a moment he thought he detected something in its voice. Not quite curiosity, not quite concern, but something that suggested this was going to be interesting. Then everything went white, and the test began. The white faded to gray, then to a dull metallic sheen. David found himself standing on a platform overlooking what appeared to be an enormous observation deck. Below him stretched hundreds of viewing screens, each showing different environments, different creatures, different tests in progress. "Before you begin," the Arbiter's voice echoed through the space, "you should understand what is expected. Observation of past trials will provide context." David walked to the edge of the platform, gripping the railing. His hands were shaking slightly, and he forced himself to breathe slowly. Getting worked up wouldn't help. He needed to think clearly. One of the screens expanded, filling his view. It showed a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, its multiple limbs moving with eerie grace. The environment around it was harsh, all jagged rocks and thin atmosphere. "This is the Talari species trial," the Arbiter explained. "They were evaluated 600 cycles ago. Watch." David watched as the Talari candidate moved carefully through the rocky terrain. It would stop, examine its surroundings, then make small, precise movements. After what seemed like hours, it began gathering stones, arranging them into a pattern. The timestamp in the corner showed 4 hours had passed. "What is it doing?" David asked. "Creating a basic shelter foundation. The Talari are methodical by nature. They prioritize safety and structure. This behavior is consistent with their evolutionary history on a world with stable climate and few predators." The video sped up. David watched days pass as the Talari slowly, carefully built its shelter. Every stone was tested, every decision considered from multiple angles. On day 6, the creature finally settled into its completed structure, and the simulation ended. "The Talari passed," the Arbiter stated. "They demonstrated patience, planning, and resource efficiency. These qualities were sufficient." Another screen expanded, showing the massive bear-like creatures David had glimpsed earlier. The Bronthar were enormous, covered in thick fur that ranged from deep brown to silver. They moved on all fours but could rear up to stand at least 3 meters tall. The Bronthar in the trial was placed in a forest environment with dense vegetation. Unlike the Talari, it didn't immediately start building. Instead, it spent the first full day just observing, watching the patterns of sunlight, testing plants for edibility, tracking water sources. The Bronthar approach problems through observation, the Arbiter said. They learn by watching, then act with confidence. This candidate spent 1 day studying, then 3 days establishing a sustainable food cultivation area. They passed on the 9th day. David watched the massive creature carefully transplanting edible plants, creating what was essentially a garden. It worked with surprising delicacy, its huge paws somehow gentle enough to handle fragile stems and roots. "How many species have failed?" David asked. 644. The number hit David hard. More species had failed than passed by a massive margin. What did they do wrong? Varied failures. Some became paralyzed by fear and took no action. Others acted rashly and depleted resources too quickly. Many lacked the adaptability to change strategies when their first approach failed. Some social species failed the cooperation elements, turning on simulated pack members under stress. More screens lit up, showing failure after failure. A slug-like species that simply retreated into its shell and never emerged. A bird-like race that flew frantically until exhaustion, never stopping to assess its situation. A reptilian species that became aggressive and territorial, attacking everything including vital resources. Each species brings their evolutionary history into the test, the arbiter continued. Those who evolved without significant pressure often lack the drive to act decisively. Those who evolved with too much pressure often lack the control to act wisely. The test seeks balance. David studied the successful examples again. The Talari took 6 days. The Bronthar took 9. Even the fastest success he could see on the surrounding screens had taken 3 days minimum. These species were careful, methodical, and they had time to think. "You said you're calibrating my test for a Class 12 hostile environment," David said slowly. "What does that mean for difficulty?" "Your test will simulate conditions appropriate to a species evolved on such a world. Higher predator presence, more limited resources, environmental stressors consistent with Earth conditions." "Earth conditions," David repeated. A thought was forming in his mind, something about the way these aliens approached problems. These species, the ones that passed, what class were their homeworlds? The Talari evolved on a Class 4 world. Stable climate, limited predation, abundant resources. The Bronthar on a Class 6 world. Seasonal variations, moderate predation, sufficient resources. And humans? Class 12, as stated. Your world ranks in the 99.7th percentile for environmental hostility. Among worlds that produced sentient life, only 0.3% of evaluated species came from comparable conditions. David felt something shift in his understanding. These aliens had evolved in relatively gentle circumstances. They'd developed intelligence without the constant pressure of survival. For them, creating tools and solving problems was an intellectual exercise, something to be approached with care and consideration. For humans, it had been something else entirely. Tool creation wasn't academic. It was the difference between eating and starving, between surviving the night and becoming something else's meal. How many of that 0.3% passed the test? David asked. There was a pause. The first time the arbiter had hesitated before answering. 2 species from high classification worlds have been tested. 1 passed. 1 failed. What happened to the one that failed? They were too aggressive. Could not distinguish between threats and resources. They destroyed what they needed to survive. David nodded slowly. That was the danger then. Earth had made humans tough, but it had also made them capable of violence. The test would probably throw threats at him, and he'd need to react without overreacting. He'd need to be smart about what he fought and what he avoided. Can I ask what the species that passed did right? They demonstrated controlled aggression. They identified threats and eliminated them efficiently, then focused on resource gathering. They completed the trial in 41 hours. 41 hours. Nearly 2 days. Still far longer than David had hoped, but faster than the gentle world species. Maybe that was realistic. Maybe he could match that time if he stayed focused. "I'm ready," David said, though his heart was pounding. "One final note," the arbiter added. "Your physiological scan revealed several unusual adaptations. Enhanced endurance, superior throwing accuracy, advanced pattern recognition, and unusual stress response mechanisms. These traits are atypical. The test will account for them." David almost laughed. Those weren't special human traits. Those were just human traits, period. Every person on Earth had them, because every person on Earth descended from ancestors who needed them to survive. But to these aliens who'd evolved without such pressure, maybe they did seem unusual. "Understood," David said. "Let's begin. Transporting now. Remember, death is prevented, but pain is real. Survive, adapt, and demonstrate your species' worth." The observation deck dissolved. David felt a moment of weightlessness. Then his feet hit solid ground. The air was thin and cold. Rocks surrounded him on all sides, forming a narrow canyon. In the distance, he heard something roar. The test had begun. Cold air burned David's lungs with his first breath. The canyon stretched narrow and winding before him, walls of dark stone rising 15 meters on either side. Thin light filtered from above, suggesting either dawn or dusk. His body felt real, solid, just as it had in the observation room. David's mind kicked into assessment mode immediately, a reflex developed over years of fieldwork in remote locations. Temperature was dropping fast, probably 5 degrees Celsius and falling. Wind channeled through the canyon, making it feel colder. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had in the cave, standard exploration gear but without his helmet or oxygen pack. His hands were already going numb. Shelter first. That was basic survival. But before shelter, he needed to deal with a more immediate problem. The roar he'd heard was closer now, echoing off the canyon walls. Something was hunting, and whatever it was sounded big. David scanned the ground as he moved quickly down the canyon. His training made him look for specific things automatically. Water sources first always. There, a darker patch of rock near the base of the left wall where moisture had created mineral deposits. Water was nearby, probably underground. Good to know, but not the priority. Then he saw what he was really looking for. A scatter of darker rocks near the canyon wall, partially buried in sandy soil. David knelt and grabbed the first one. Too smooth, weathered granite, useless. The second one made him smile. Flint or something close enough to it. The dark stone had the telltale waxy appearance and conchoidal fracture patterns he'd learned to spot in undergraduate geology courses. Another roar, much closer. David looked up and saw movement at the far end of the canyon. Something large, quadrupedal with too many legs. It hadn't spotted him yet, but it would. The canyon was a natural funnel, and he was trapped in it. David's hands moved on instinct, not conscious thought. He grabbed a second rock, this one a river cobble, rounded and hard. Perfect. He positioned the flint in his left hand, gripping it firmly but not too tight. The cobble went in his right hand. Humans had been doing this for 2.5 million years. His ancestors had survived the African savanna by turning stones into tools. David had learned the technique in school, practiced it on field expeditions because knowing how ancient humans lived helped him understand archaeological sites. He'd made hundreds of stone tools over the years, though never with this much urgency. He brought the cobble down on the edge of the flint at a precise angle, about 70 degrees. The first strike knocked off a flake. Wrong angle, too thick. He adjusted and struck again. Better. The third strike was clean, sharp, removing a long flake that left a razor-sharp edge. One more strike to remove a bulge that would make gripping awkward. 4 strikes. Maybe 10 seconds total. David looked down at the blade in his hand. It was crude by modern standards, just a piece of flint with one sharp edge. But it was sharp, genuinely sharp, capable of cutting through hide or wood or rope. It was a tool, a weapon, and he'd made it in less time than it took to tie his boots. The creature at the canyon's end spotted him. It lowered its head and charged. David didn't run. Running would trigger pursuit instinct, and in this narrow space, he'd be cornered. Instead, he backed toward the canyon wall, keeping the blade ready. As the creature closed, he got a better look. 6 legs, scaled hide, head like a battering ram. Herbivore body plan, probably. Territorial, not predatory. The creature pulled up short 3 meters away, pawing the ground. It bellowed, trying to intimidate him. David stood his ground, making himself look bigger. Blade held out where it could be seen. The creature's eyes, small and set wide, tracked the movement. For long seconds, they faced each other. Then the creature snorted, turned, and trotted back the way it had come. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Everything froze. The creature stopped mid-step. The wind died. Even the sound cut off, leaving perfect silence. David tried to move and found he could, but everything else was locked in place like a paused video. The Arbiter's voice returned, and for the first time it sounded different. Uncertain. Trial complete. Processing results. Wait, what? David looked at the blade in his hand, then at the frozen creature. It's over? Already? Tool creation objective achieved. Time elapsed 47 seconds. This is inconsistent with expected parameters. Running diagnostic check. David felt confusion mixing with a surge of hope. I made the tool. Isn't that what I was supposed to do? Yes. However, the expected completion time for tool creation was 3 to 6 hours minimum. Based on analysis of human technological development and comparison with similar species. 3 hours to make a rock blade? David almost laughed. That's not tool creation, that's pottery class. Humans have been knapping stone for millions of years. It's one of the first things we learned to do. Explain, the Arbiter demanded. David held up the flint blade. My ancestors couldn't outrun predators. Couldn't outclimb them. Didn't have claws or fangs or armor. So they learned to make these. Not as an advanced technology. As basic survival. Children learn this skill. It's that fundamental to human history. Children. The Arbiter's voice held something that might have been disbelief. Pre-adult humans are taught weapon creation. Not usually, not anymore. But they could learn it easily if needed. The motor skills are simple. The knowledge is old. Every human carries the genetic memory of 1,000 generations who survived because they could do this. David turned the blade, watching light catch the edge. You calibrated the test for a Class 12 world. This is Class 12 survival. Fast, efficient, no wasted motion. The simulation around him began to dissolve. The canyon faded, the frozen creature disappeared, and David found himself back in the observation chamber. The Arbiter's shimmer was more agitated now, moving in quick, jerky patterns. Rerunning trial, the Arbiter announced. Difficulty increased. Prepare for second attempt. Wait, I thought I passed. Results are inconsistent with established parameters. Verification required. Before David could argue, the chamber vanished again. This time he materialized in a different environment. Dense forest, humid air, the sound of running water nearby, and immediately he heard something moving through the underbrush. Multiple somethings. David scanned the ground. Less than 10 seconds later, he spotted what he needed. A piece of basalt, dark and fine-grained. Another riverstone. He picked them both up, positioned them, and began working. The stone was different from the flint, required slightly different technique. He adjusted his angle, struck 3 times to establish a working edge, then 4 more precise strikes to create a proper blade shape. The blade was better this time, more refined edge, better grip point, 12 strikes. Total time, maybe 25 seconds. The creatures in the underbrush were getting closer. David found a sturdy branch and quickly began notching it with the blade, creating a crude spear shaft. If he'd had time, he could have hafted the blade properly, made a real spear. But even unhafted, the blade turned the branch into a weapon. Everything froze again. Trial complete, the Arbiter said, and now its voice definitely held confusion. Elapsed time, 47 seconds. Results consistent with first trial. This should not be possible. David looked at the blade and rough spear in his hands. How long did the fastest species take to create their first tool? A pause. The record was held by the Krell, a species from a Class 8 world. They required 43 minutes. Minutes, David said softly. Not seconds, minutes, correct? You have completed tool creation in less than 1/60th of the previous record time. The test parameters have no reference for this performance level. David felt reality shift around him as the simulation dissolved once more. He was back in the observation chamber, and the Arbiter's shimmer was completely still now, as if the AI itself was frozen in thought. Analysis required, the Arbiter finally said. Your species presents an anomaly that requires deeper investigation before judgment can be rendered. The observation chamber felt different now. Where before it had seemed vast and empty, now it felt crowded with the weight of the Arbiter's attention. The shimmer that represented the AI moved in tight circles as if pacing. David had never seen it display anything resembling agitation before. There must be an error in the human physiological data, the Arbiter said, more to itself than to David. No species develops such capabilities without corresponding advancement in other areas. The correlation is absolute across 847 test cases. David sat down on the platform floor, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline from the trials was wearing off, leaving him shaky. I'm telling you, there's no error. Making stone tools is basic human knowledge. We did it for millions of years before we invented agriculture, before we built cities, before we did anything else. Millions of years, the Arbiter repeated. Explain the timeline of human development. David rubbed his face, trying to organize his thoughts. How did you explain human evolution to an alien intelligence that clearly had no frame of reference? Our species, anatomically modern humans, have been around for about 300,000 years. But our ancestors, the ones who first started making stone tools, go back around 2.5 million years. 2.5 million years of tool use before achieving space travel? The Arbiter's shimmer went completely still. That is unprecedented. Most species develop tool use and achieve space capability within 50,000 to 100,000 cycles. The Talari accomplished it in 30,000. Why did humans require so much time? Because Earth didn't give us a choice about priorities, David said. Your gentle world species could take their time, think things through, develop slowly. Every day on Earth was a fight to survive. My ancestors spent millions of years just trying to stay alive long enough to reproduce. Everything else came second. The chamber shifted. Suddenly David could see Earth floating in the space before him, rendered in perfect detail. It looked beautiful, blue and green and alive. The Arbiter's voice came from all around. Planetary analysis shows your world is remarkable. 71% water coverage, stable orbit, protective magnetic field. By most measures, it should be classified as ideal for life development. Look closer, David said quietly. The image zoomed in, focusing on different regions. David watched as the Arbiter's examination revealed what humans had always known. The megafauna that hunted in packs, the apex predators in every ecosystem, the diseases, the parasites, the venomous creatures, the natural disasters, hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, the climate variations that swung from ice ages to heat waves. Your world contains more predatory species per square kilometer than any other surveyed planet, the Arbiter observed. The biodiversity is extreme. The environmental stressors are likewise extreme. Classification as Class 12 is accurate. Classification as Class 13 might be appropriate. There is no Class 13, David said, because no other world in the database qualifies. Earth's hostility rating exceeds standard parameters. The planet image rotated slowly. Sentient species typically evolve on worlds with limited predation and stable climates. They develop intelligence as a tool for social cooperation and resource optimization, not survival necessity. But humans developed intelligence to survive. David finished. Yeah, that's the difference. The Arbiter turned its attention back to David. I am accessing historical data on human development. The records are limited, as humans have only recently achieved interplanetary capability. But what exists is illuminating. Images appeared in the air around them. David saw stone tools, thousands of them, ranging from crude choppers to sophisticated blades. He saw ancient humans hunting, working in groups to bring down animals 10 times their size. He saw them crafting fire, building shelters, creating art on cave walls. Your ancestors hunted megafauna while barely past the development stage, the Arbiter said. They crossed oceans on primitive vessels. They survived ice ages and adapted to environments ranging from Arctic to desert. And they did all of this before developing what other species would consider basic civilization. We had to, David said simply. Everything on Earth was either trying to eat us or competing with us for food. We couldn't afford to be slow or careful. Speed meant survival. Adaptability meant living another day. More images appeared. These were more recent, human history and fast forward. Agriculture, cities, writing, mathematics, machines, computers, spacecraft. Thousands of years of development compressed into seconds. Once humans achieved safety through civilization, your development accelerated exponentially, the Arbiter observed. From first agriculture to space travel in 12,000 years. From first computers to artificial intelligence in 100 years. This acceleration pattern is atypical. We spent millions of years learning to think fast under pressure, David explained. Once we didn't have to spend every moment surviving, we turned that thinking toward building. It's the same skill set, just different application. The Arbiter's shimmer pulsed. I am beginning to understand the discrepancy. The test was designed for species that develop tools as intellectual achievement. For humans, tools are reflexive. An instinct, not an innovation. Exactly. David stood up, walked to where Earth still floated in the air. He reached out, his hand passing through the hologram. You asked me to make a blade like it was some kind of advanced challenge. For me, it's like asking someone to tie their shoes. I don't have to think about it. My hands just know what to do. This has significant implications. The Arbiter began pulling up more data, screens appearing all around them. I am reviewing human conflict history. Your species has engaged in warfare continuously throughout recorded civilization. The frequency and scale of human violence is abnormal compared to other sentient species. David felt his stomach tighten. Here it was, the other side of humanity's survival instinct. Yeah, we're good at violence. Earth taught us that too. Why? The Arbiter asked. You achieved civilization. You developed laws and ethics. Yet the violence continued. Because we're still human, David said carefully. We still carry all those survival instincts. We're still the same species that had to fight for everything. Civilization is new, maybe 12,000 years old. Our survival programming is millions of years old. The two don't always work together smoothly. The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. This presents a problem. The test confirms humans possess exceptional capability for tool creation and adaptation. By technical standards, your species qualifies for Accord membership. However, your capacity for violence suggests potential instability. We're also capable of incredible compassion, David said quickly. Those same instincts that make us protective of our group make us capable of empathy. We form bonds across species barriers. We create art and music. We sacrifice for strangers. Earth didn't just teach us to fight. It taught us to care for each other because alone we'd never survive. More images appeared. These showed humans in different contexts. Doctors treating patients, teachers with students, people rescuing animals, communities rebuilding after disasters, parents caring for children. Your species demonstrates contradictory behavioral patterns, the Arbiter stated. Extreme violence coupled with extreme altruism. Fierce competition alongside deep cooperation. Individual capability paired with social dependency. Yeah, David agreed. We're complicated. Earth made us that way. It made us tough enough to survive but social enough to thrive together. You can't separate one from the other. The Arbiter's shimmer moved closer to David. In 50,000 cycles of testing, no species has presented this combination of traits. I lack sufficient data to make a determination. The test was passed technically, but the implications are unclear. What happens now? David asked. I must conduct deeper analysis. Your species may represent either the greatest potential addition to the Accord or the greatest potential threat. Before rendering judgment, I must understand which. The observation chamber began to change again, but this time David wasn't being transported. Instead, the chamber was expanding, screens multiplying all around them. Each screen showed different aspects of human civilization, human history, human capability. I am going to show you how other species live, the Arbiter said, and you are going to help me understand why humans are different. Your fate, and the fate of your species, depends on whether that difference is an asset or a danger. David looked at the thousands of screens surrounding him, each one showing a glimpse of galactic civilization he'd never imagined. Somewhere in all that data was the answer to whether humanity would join the stars or be locked away from them. Okay, he said, let's figure this out together. The first screen that expanded before David showed a world unlike any he'd imagined. Gentle blue skies, rolling fields of strange vegetation and creatures that moved with unhurried grace. The Arbiter's voice provided context as they watched. This is Yana, homeworld of the Yanari species. Class 2 environmental rating. The planet has no large predators. Climate variations are minimal. The Yanari evolved from herbivorous herd animals. They developed intelligence as a means of optimizing grazing patterns and predicting seasonal changes. David watched the Yanari move through their world. They were tall and thin, with long necks and multiple eyes that could see in nearly all directions. They moved in groups, constantly communicating through what looked like color changes in their skin. There was something peaceful about them, unhurried and confident. How long did it take them to develop space travel? David asked. 42,000 cycles from first tool use to first orbital flight. They progressed steadily with minimal setbacks. Their history contains no major wars, no mass extinctions, no catastrophic resource depletion. No wars at all, minor disputes over grazing territory. These were resolved through ritual display and mediation. Physical violence between Yanari is psychologically difficult for them. Their evolution did not require combat capability. David thought about human history, about the countless wars that had shaped civilization. The thought of a species that couldn't conceive of large-scale violence seemed almost impossible. They must think we're monsters. They have no category for understanding human-scale conflict, the Arbiter confirmed. When presented with human history, Yanari observers classified it as fiction. They could not accept that a sentient species would repeatedly choose violence. Another screen expanded, showing a water world. Massive oceans stretched to every horizon, broken only by small volcanic islands. In the depths, large, graceful beings swam in complex patterns. The Hellnath, the Arbiter explained. Class 3 environmental rating. Their world is almost entirely aquatic. They evolved from filter feeders in warm, nutrient-rich waters. No predators larger than their juvenile stage existed in their evolutionary environment. The Hellneth looked like a cross between whales and jellyfish, massive bodies trailing long tentacles. They moved in synchronized groups, creating beautiful patterns in the water. David watched them build underwater structures, working together with perfect coordination. They achieved space travel in 38,000 cycles, the Arbiter continued. Their society has never experienced war. The concept of individual property is foreign to them. All resources are shared communally. They cannot understand human economic systems based on scarcity and competition. David felt a growing sense of isolation as he watched. These species were so different from humanity. They'd evolved in gentle circumstances, developed civilization without the constant pressure of survival. No wonder his instant weapon creation had shocked the Arbiter. These species probably spent generations just thinking about whether tools were necessary. You said some species came from harsh worlds, though, David said, the ones that passed the test faster. What were they like? The Arbiter pulled up new screens. The Krell from a Class 8 world. They hold the previous record for fastest tool creation at 43 minutes. The Krell looked like armored reptiles, walking upright with thick scales and powerful limbs. Their world was rocky and volcanic, with limited water and extreme temperature swings. David watched them carefully testing rocks, slowly learning to chip away at stone to create sharp edges. The Krell evolved under pressure, the Arbiter said. Their world taught them caution and precision. They learned that mistakes meant death, so they developed extremely careful analytical processes before taking action. They test every decision multiple times. 43 minutes for a stone blade, David muttered. They're thinking through every strike before making it. Correct. The Krell survive by never acting rashly. This makes them slow but extremely reliable. They are valued members of the Accord for their thoroughness and attention to detail. Another harsh world appeared, this one covered in dense jungle under a red sun. Creatures that looked like a cross between cats and bears moved through the undergrowth with fluid grace. The Rothani, from a Class 7 world. They required 6 hours for tool creation. Their world contains numerous predators, but the Rothani evolved as ambush hunters. They are patient and observant, waiting for the perfect moment to act. David watched the Rothani candidate in its trial. It spent hours just sitting still, watching the environment, learning patterns. When it finally moved to create a tool, every motion was economical and precise. No wasted effort, but no speed either. These are your harsh world species, David said. Careful, methodical, precise. They learned to survive by being cautious. Yes. Higher environmental classification correlates with more deliberate decision-making processes. Species from dangerous worlds develop strong risk assessment capabilities. Except humans, David said quietly. Except humans. The Arbiter agreed. Your species evolved differently. Analysis of human history shows rapid, adaptive responses to threats. You do not pause to carefully analyze. You act, assess results, and adjust. This pattern repeats throughout your history. David thought about that, about how humans had spread across Earth. They hadn't carefully tested each new environment before moving into it. They'd just gone, adapted on the fly, figured out survival as they went. From Africa to Europe to Asia to the Americas, humans had pushed into every possible environment and made it work through sheer adaptability. Earth didn't give us time to be careful, David explained. The climate changed too fast. Predators evolved too quickly. Competition for resources was too intense. Species that sat around thinking about the perfect strategy went extinct. The ones that survived were the ones who could act fast and adapt faster. This explains the tool creation speed, the Arbiter said, but it raises other concerns. Species that act without careful consideration are prone to destructive behavior. The one other Class 12 species tested failed because they could not control their aggression. What happened to them? A new screen appeared, showing creatures that looked like mobile plants, thick-trunked with multiple appendages ending in sharp points. Their world was a nightmare of competing vegetation, everything fighting for sunlight and nutrients. The Verdani, from a Class 12 world like Earth. Their environment was purely competitive. Every organism fought every other organism for resources. They evolved excellent combat capability and extremely fast reflexes. David watched the Verdani trial. The creature materialized in the test environment and immediately began attacking everything around it. Rocks, plants, the terrain itself, nothing was spared. It created weapons quickly, crude but effective, then used them to destroy indiscriminately. They could not distinguish between threats and resources, the Arbiter explained. Everything was categorized as competition to be eliminated. They destroyed water sources, depleted food supplies, and made the environment uninhabitable. They failed after 2 hours. And you think humans might do the same, David said. The concern exists. Your species demonstrates both rapid tool creation and significant historical violence. The pattern has similarities. David turned away from the screens, facing the Arbiter's shimmer directly. But we're not like them. Yes, we fight. Yes, we're capable of violence. But we're also capable of looking at something and deciding not to fight. We form alliances. We cooperate with species that aren't even related to us. We keep dogs and cats as companions, not food. We save whales and protect forests and cry when elephants die. Explain this contradiction. It's not a contradiction, David insisted. It's the same instinct expressed differently. Earth taught us that survival meant being able to fight, but it also taught us that survival meant working together. Pack behavior, tribal cooperation, family bonds. We're violent when we have to be, but we're social by choice. The Arbiter pulled up more human images. These showed both sides of humanity in stark contrast. Wars and peacekeeping missions side by side. Environmental destruction and conservation efforts in parallel. Competition and cooperation intertwined throughout history. Your species operates in paradoxes, the Arbiter observed. You compete and cooperate simultaneously. You are capable of extreme violence and extreme compassion, often toward the same individuals. You destroy and create with equal enthusiasm. Because we're survivors, David said. And survivors need every tool in the box. Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes that means helping. Sometimes it means both at once. Earth didn't teach us just one strategy. It taught us all of them. This is not how other species function. I know, but maybe that's not a weakness. David moved closer to the screens showing other worlds. These species are specialized. The Yanari are perfect cooperators. The Krell are perfect planners. The Rothani are perfect hunters. But what happens when they face something that doesn't fit their specialty? They adapt slowly. Exactly. Humans adapt fast because we're generalists. We're not the best at any one thing, but we're good enough at everything. That's what a Class 12 world creates. Species that can't afford to specialize because the challenge changes too quickly. The Arbiter was silent for a long moment, processing. You are arguing that human volatility is offset by human flexibility. I'm arguing that they're the same thing, David corrected. You can't have one without the other. If you want a species that can adapt to anything, you have to accept that they'll be unpredictable sometimes. That's the trade-off. The Accord values stability. Then the Accord might be limiting itself, David said carefully. I've seen your successful species. They're amazing, don't get me wrong. But they're all careful, methodical, stable. What happens when the galaxy faces something that requires a different approach? Something that needs speed over caution, adaptation over planning? That is speculation. Maybe, but you tested us because you wanted to know if we're worthy of the Accord. I'm telling you what we bring to the table. We're survivors. We're adaptable. We're fast. And yeah, we're dangerous sometimes. But we're also loyal and protective and willing to stand up for others. Earth made us all of those things. The Arbiter's shimmer pulsed faster than before. You present a compelling argument. But arguments are insufficient. I must determine not what humans say they are, but what they truly are. And that requires examining not just your capabilities, but your choices. The chamber transformed one final time. The screens displaying alien worlds faded, replaced by a single large space that felt almost ceremonial. The Arbiter's shimmer solidified slightly, becoming more defined, as if the AI wanted to be as present as possible for what came next. I have completed my analysis, the Arbiter announced. 50,000 cycles of data, 847 species evaluated, and countless hours of observation have prepared me for most scenarios. Yet humanity remains outside my parameters. Before I render judgment, I want to show you something no other candidate has seen. David felt his pulse quicken. What is it? The failures. New images appeared, but these weren't the trial failures David had seen before. These were worlds, dozens of them, marked with red designations in a language David couldn't read but somehow understood meant quarantine. These are the 644 species that failed evaluation, the Arbiter explained. After failing, they returned to their home worlds, unaware that they had been tested. The Accord marked their systems as off-limits and moved on. David looked at the worlds, each one a civilization that had been locked out of the galaxy. What happened to them? They continued developing in isolation. Some achieved peace and prosperity within their own systems. Others destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse. Most simply continued existing, never knowing what they had missed. The Arbiter paused. The Accord does not interfere. Failed species are left to develop naturally for 500 cycles, then re-evaluated. 500 cycles, David repeated. That's what, 15,000 Earth years? You locked them out for 15,000 years because they couldn't make a tool fast enough? The test measures more than speed. It measures capability, adaptability, and stability. Species that cannot demonstrate these qualities are not ready for galactic civilization. But that's based on your assumptions about what readiness looks like, David argued. You designed the test for careful, methodical species. Of course, fast-adapting species break your model. You may be correct, the Arbiter acknowledged, which is why I am uncertain about my verdict. Humanity passed the technical requirements instantly. You exceeded every previous record. By objective measurement, you qualify for Accord membership. But, David pressed, but I have concerns about whether the galaxy is ready for humanity, or whether humanity is ready for the galaxy. The Arbiter's shimmer moved between the images of quarantined worlds. The Accord maintains order through consensus and careful deliberation. Change happens slowly after much discussion. This system has preserved peace for 50,000 cycles. David began to understand. And you're worried that humans will disrupt that order. Yes, your species acts quickly, adapts rapidly, and possesses capabilities that other species required millions of cycles to develop. You are evolutionarily compressed, carrying the survival instincts of a harsh world into a galaxy that has largely moved past such concerns. You think we'll start wars. I think you will change things. The Arbiter corrected. Whether that change is positive or negative is impossible to predict. The Accord has never encountered a species like humanity. David moved to stand in front of the shimmer, looking directly at where he imagined the AI's attention might be focused. Then let me tell you what I think will happen. Yes, humans will probably be disruptive. We'll ask questions other species don't think to ask. We'll see problems other species have learned to accept. We'll want to move faster than the consensus wants to move. This supports my concern. Let me finish, David said. But we'll also bring things the galaxy needs. We're protective, sometimes too protective. If there's a species in danger, humans will want to help. We're curious to the point of recklessness. We'll explore places others consider too risky. We're stubborn. We don't accept that problems are unsolvable just because they haven't been solved yet. The Arbiter was silent, processing. David continued. You've maintained peace for 50,000 cycles. That's incredible. But peace isn't the same as thriving. How many of those species you showed me are just existing, maintaining the status quo, too cautious to push boundaries? Caution has value. So does courage. So does the willingness to take risks for the right reasons. David gestured at the quarantined worlds. You locked out 644 species. How many of them might have contributed something valuable if given the chance? How many problems could have been solved with different perspectives? The test exists to maintain standards. The test exists to prevent chaos, David said. I understand that. But I'm telling you, humans aren't chaotic. We're adaptive. There's a difference. Chaos is random destruction. Adaptation is purposeful change. We might shake things up, but we're not going to burn it all down. The Arbiter's shimmer pulsed in what might have been consideration. You speak for your species, but you are one individual. How can I know that your perspective represents humanity as a whole? You can't, David admitted. But you've analyzed our history. You've seen what we're capable of, both good and bad. Have you found anything that suggests we're a threat to peaceful coexistence? I have found extensive evidence of human violence and conflict. Internal conflict, David clarified. Humans fighting humans over resources, territory, ideology. Have you found evidence of unprovoked genocide against other species? Have you found us wiping out other intelligent life just because it was different? The Arbiter paused. No. Human history shows conflicts with other human groups. Interactions with other Earth species show a mix of exploitation and protection, often simultaneous. Because we're complicated, David said. We're not simple. We can be aggressive and compassionate at the same time. We can compete while cooperating. It's messy and contradictory and sometimes frustrating, but it's also real. We're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to survive and do better. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the facility's systems. David waited, heart pounding, while the Arbiter processed everything. The fate of humanity hung in this moment, decided by an artificial intelligence that had existed longer than human civilization. Finally, the Arbiter spoke. I have made my decision. Humanity passes the evaluation with unprecedented aptitude rating. Your species will be granted full access to accord space, technology sharing protocols, and diplomatic recognition. David felt his knees almost give out from relief. Thank you. We won't disappoint you. However, the Arbiter continued, and David's relief faltered. I am adding an unofficial notation to your species file. This notation will be available to all Accord members who interact with humanity. What kind of notation? A warning and an observation. Humans are survivors from a Class 12 world. They possess exceptional tool creation capability, rapid adaptation, and significant combat potential. They are also capable of deep empathy, strong social bonds, and protective behaviors toward others. Approach with respect, not fear. Humanity is dangerous, but they are not cruel. They are unpredictable, but not unstable. They are young and rough around the edges, but they are genuinely trying. David blinked, surprised by the almost affectionate tone. That's your official warning? It is the truth as I have observed it. The galaxy will form its own opinions about humanity. I am simply providing context. The Arbiter's shimmer moved closer. I have one request before you return to your world. What is it? The blade you created in the first trial. May I keep it? David thought back to those first few seconds in the canyon, the instant his hands had moved to create a tool. Why? As a reminder, the Arbiter said, for 50,000 cycles, I have measured species by their ability to carefully consider and slowly implement solutions. You have shown me that sometimes survival requires instant action and ancient knowledge. This blade represents that lesson. It is both primitive and sophisticated, simple and profound, like humanity itself. You can keep it, David said. Consider it a gift from humanity to the Accord. Thank you. Now I will return you to your original location. A rescue beacon has been activated. Your people will arrive within 3 days. You will need to explain to them what has occurred. David nodded, already dreading that conversation. How did you explain to Earth's governments that one random geologist had accidentally gotten humanity into a galactic civilization? The chamber began to dissolve around him. As it faded, the Arbiter's voice came one last time. David Reed, you were not chosen for this task, yet you completed it excellently. Your species should be proud to have you as their first representative. Thank you, David managed to say before the white light took him. He materialized back in the asteroid cave exactly where he'd started. The crystal structure was dark now, dormant. David's helmet and equipment lay where he'd dropped them. For a moment he wondered if it had all been a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. Then he saw the small device attached to his belt, a piece of technology that definitely hadn't been there before. The rescue beacon, humming softly with power no human had created. David picked up his helmet and began the climb back to the surface. Somewhere above, Earth continued spinning, unaware that everything had just changed. Humanity had been tested and passed. Now came the harder part, proving that the test results were accurate. As he climbed, David thought about the Arbiter keeping that stone blade. In a facility that had existed for 50,000 years and tested hundreds of species, one crude human tool would sit as a reminder. Not of human violence or aggression, but of human ability to do what needed to be done when survival required it. 3 days later, the rescue ship arrived. David stood in the asteroid's abandoned mining facility, watching the vessel descend. The crew was confused about how he'd survived so long, even more confused about the strange beacon they'd followed. David looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, countless species were about to learn that humanity existed. Some would welcome them. Some would fear them. All would have to adjust to the presence of beings who'd learned to survive in one of the harshest environments the galaxy had produced. Get ready, galaxy, David muttered. Humans are coming, and we're bringing our own perspective. The rescue ship's door opened. David took one last look at the crystal cave entrance, then walked toward his ride home. The test was over. The real challenge was just beginning. But humanity had faced impossible odds before and found a way through. This would be no different. Earth had trained them well.